Crazy Climber for the Nintendo Wii. This is a weird one. I don't think I really knew about this when it came out, but this is I believe, really early Wii game that is based off the Crazy Climber arcade game, a game that I actually know very little about. So I'm more or less coming in fresh on this, but it kind of caught my attention because it was a Japanese-only game that was put out on the Wii early on, which is, Wii's kind of one of the last systems you had there where the Japanese lineup at launch or in the launch window could often be significantly different than the US one, right? So it's kind of fascinating. This game was around, I think, the first year of the system's life kind of thing. But more or less, though, I don't really know much about Crazy Climber, so I'm pretty much, experiencing this one fresh, so I can't tell you what is related to past Crazy Climbers, what's not related to past Crazy Climbers, but what I can say is, in the case of this one, it is a pretty simple kind of like arcade-style game for the Wii, where you basically are starting at, maybe not the bottom of the tower, but, somewhere a ways away from the top of a tower, skyscraper or whatever, and you're climbing up window seals to get to the very top of the building. And if you don't stop moving while you're climbing, your combo multiplier increases, which ultimately increases your overall score. So obviously there's more than just you climbing up window seals, though, because there are various obstacles that get in the way. Early on, people opening their windows and dropping objects down on you is mostly the biggest thing. There's also like these shutters that kind of open and close on certain windows that can crush your fingers if you get there at the wrong time. There's doors or windows will swing open kind of like unannounced and things like that. And then there's also like smooth walls that if you stop on them, your character will get stuck and then kind of slide back down and things like that. And then later on, there's definitely a lot more complicated ones with booby traps, with like, swinging axes, falling rocks and stuff like that. And also like bosses almost. You don't defeat them or anything, but there's like a, giant ape at the top of the tower that's basically going around and swinging a mallet. So you have to avoid him while climbing. You don't really fight him or anything like that. So but it's entirely motion control based, maybe not too surprising for an early Wii game. You basically swing the nunchuck and Wii remote rhythmically back and forth to continue to climb, and if you keep doing that on good timing, your character will continue to climb and continue to get a multiplier every time he hits a window seal, basically. If you want to move only one space, you can just swing both the Wii remote and nunchuck at the same time. Swinging left or right moves you to the left or right window, but then probably the faster way and better thing to do when you're trying to build a combo is to jump sideways. So when you're swinging, you're doing your rhythmic swinging left and right, you can also hold the A button and swing right or left, and that will cause your character to jump up a space while also, moving to the left or the right. So the only thing you can't do is climb backwards, basically, for the most part. But it works pretty well most of the time. It's definitely not like 100%, but it's good enough, and it tries to, kind of mimic that feel of climbing a tower. It doesn't necessarily, I think, work super well. I think just like the natural motion of climbing is not well replicated by just swinging the Wiimote and nunchuck nonstop. But, I can kind of understand like why they would get the control scheme that they did using it. There's only a little under like 10-ish levels or so in the game. You can kind of just pick one, the one you want to play. But there's also kind of like a campaign you can do. There's nothing really to it other than you get like a credit sequence at the end if you get through it. But the scoring is all level-based, basically. So, you get a score on a board, move on to the next one, you start at 0 again. Mechanically, all very similar. They're going to look very similar on screen here. And the only real difference is the mix of obstacles they're using. So each stage kind of has its own variety of obstacles. Then there's also kind of a good amount of visual variety. Despite being a game about climbing up window seals, I think they do a pretty good job of making that look unique on each stage, even if it is, largely structurally very similar. It's very plain looking on a budget, but it has its charm. So, as I mentioned earlier with the scoring part, the key gimmick is to move nonstop. And so what this game is all about, really, in a lot of ways, is trying to learn each level and understand the path and when obstacles queue and things like that, and then go ahead and use that knowledge on every preceding run to try to build a combo. And I would assume there is an ultimate path in this game that would be the best path that you could basically combo every single window if you want. So there's probably like a hard cap on your score and things like that. But obviously you're not going to get there on your first or second try, and I never got there myself. So your real objective here, if you're not doing any kind of like score chasing, is really to just get to the end of all the stages without losing all your lives or running out of time. There's 4 different characters you can choose from, and some of them have their own different, or well, they all have their own different weaknesses that they have. It doesn't change how they climb, but it changes how they react to getting hit while climbing. So some characters will die if they get hit by a booby trap, while other ones will die if they get hit by, or if they get like their fingers closed on a shutter. So each character has their own strength and weaknesses, and even if they don't die, they might fall at different rates depending on the different types of obstacle that you hit and things like that. So you kind of, I think probably ideally for most people, you kind of pick the character that is going to help compensate for your weakest aspect. And for me, that was definitely like the obstacles. I was really bad at those. And there's also like windows that when they swing open really fast, it's really hard to tell which ones are going to swing open. And if you're moving at a combo speed, you basically won't know, and you'll get hit by it. So you have to really memorize the course to move to get past some of those without dying. So playing the robot, even though he's like my least favorite character look-wise, ended up being my fate because he survived most of the things that I had the most trouble with through it. So. It's one of those games that it's not really about, trying to get through all the stages. There's not a lot going on. So me approaching it that way is kind of weird. It is a precision-based score game kind of thing. And that's kind of one of its biggest problems for me, is that for a score game, especially precision-based ones, the Wii is just not a good platform, at least when we talk about the motion controls, because it leads to a lot of extra frustration where whenever you end up in a situation where you put an input in, and it's the input, at least as far as your mind has read how you physically moved, but it does the opposite of what you want to do. You want to jump right, but instead you jump left right into an axe, right? That's a really frustrating thing, and the motion controls just adds a level of uncertainty on there where a button press would definitely like reduce the concern about that stuff. And so I think, there's this idea, or it's built definitely behind like, hey, learn and get a better score, memorize these levels and get a better score, and earn yourself a spot on this leaderboard. No online, so it's just your local leaderboard. But the way that this game's like uncertainty is with motion controls at times, I think ultimately kind of pushes me away from that, because it's just a really frustrating experience when you are just like on a great combo and then just in the middle of it, you jump to the right and your character jumps to the left instead and ends that combo. And so I personally just couldn't really enjoy it that way. So what I basically did, I just set a max number of lives on a character and went through all the stages and just to kind of see everything basically. And I think it's really cute, and I'm glad I still played it that way, but I think ultimately like the lack of the ability to reliably perform those moves is going to prevent me from really enjoying this game fully for what it is, unfortunately. I wouldn't necessarily, recommend yourself going out of your way to try this. Maybe you can get the motion controls to work in a way that's in your favor, and you can, run this game a bunch. But I just don't think. My suspicion is that a lot of people probably have trouble with it. I'm somebody who usually does pretty well with Wii motion controls, so whenever I stumble into a problem, I imagine most other people will as well. But I do think it's worth trying if you have like quick and easy access to it. If you just have it like loaded up on a Wii and you can just, select it real quick, just check it out. See it? It's cute. It's kind of interesting. And it's always interesting, I think, to see how people, handle the Wii early on when it comes to motion controls and the types of games they're making and things like that. The Wii's just like a fascinating platform for that kind of thing. But when it comes to games that are more like, score-based and things like that, I think like Elevator Mission on the Wii is definitely one of my more preferred ones, because it uses things like the infrared pointer on the controller. And so it like, it's a much more precise input you have, and you have a lot more control over that. And the problem I just find with most Wii games is anytime they really expect you to consistently perform while using motion controls, it just doesn't work very well. And you need to basically have some built-in buffer for the player to make sure that they are getting what they need out of the controls, and that if there is a frustration, it doesn't mean that you lose a run based off of it if you run into an issue where the input you put in doesn't necessarily line up with the input that you or at least the input that thought you put in lined up with what actually comes out in the game. It's just a really frustrating experience, I think.